very much for joining us this morning. I think it's a very relevant topic in the industry currently. With the Act coming into place, and there's a lot of legislation currently and previously in the past few years that actually rattled the industry. And one of them was the Poppy Act. I normally refer to pre-Poppy and post-Poppy because everybody's like, there's a new piece of legislation. We need to stop. We need to close. I don't know what to do. The same with the Property Practitioners Act. Everybody, there's a rattle. And I think it's unjustified. And there's a lot of questions coming from, and this is why we're here, to clarify some of the questions. I've got, as a legal practitioner, not a property practitioner, as a legal practitioner, I've got some questions. Because the interpretation of the Act is quite difficult. And this is why we have this panel of experts here today. So let's start off. Just an introduction from the two of you.
Good morning. My name is Daylin Kambule, and I'm the acting CEO of the PPRA. With me is my colleague.
Morning, everyone. I'm Deborah Vile. I'm one of the acting executives and in the legal field particularly. So, so this is where the buck stops, I guess, between Deli and I.
Okay, so let's start off. The EAAB versus the Property Practitioners Regulatory Authority. Tell us the difference.
Yeah, I think the difference is in relation to the wide mandate that we have. Under the PPRA, we are now regulating about 12 role players. Previously, we were only regulating estate agents. And I think this has then meant that as an entity, we are now going to have to do a lot of work in trying to ensure that all of these people or property practitioners that we're now regulating are registered properly. So if I can just mention, it includes your auctioneers, your bond brokers, your managing agents, your property platforms. So any person who then conducts a property-related transaction and who does so based on a mandate and is remunerated for that is then called a property practitioner. And I think also the difference between the PPRA and the EAAB is that under the EAAB, we were issuing an annual FFC, and now we are now issuing an FFC for a 3-year period. Further to that, we're driving transformation under the EAAB, but we were driving it as part of the MTSF. However, under the PPRA, we are now mandated, the Act specifically mandates us to drive transformation within the industry. We also have then set up a transformation fund that will then allow us to drive transformation. There's also the introduction of the Property Research Center, where we'll have a repository that will have knowledge in relation to the sector. So under the PPRA, as Joseph said, we have a lot to do, and we are regulating 12 new role players.
That's awesome. Because the thing is, from an industry perspective, we see this, and there was a lot of challenges, like let's not beat around the bush with the EAAB. There was a lot of challenges. And it seemed like all of these challenges, and then there was an end. Now we have the PPRA. Is it the same entity, but clothed differently? Or what are you going to do? What's the change for the industry?
I think, well, what the Act says is that the EAAB it ceased to operate, and we're now under the PPRA. So yes, it's a new entity, but I think we took along some of the things that we were doing under the EAAB, and we're continuing to do them, but to a larger scale now, such that we have, as I was speaking, we are driving transformation. We've got a fund that will drive transformation. Also, just in terms of the people that we are now regulating, so every person that is going to be doing property will now fall under the PPRA, as long as you fall under the definition as in Section 1. And when you also look at the fines that we can now impose for contravention of the Act as well, they are orders that are similar to those of a magistrate court. So yes, the EAAB has moved on, ceased, but it has moved on and it's now under the PPRA.
Thank you. So the question rather is, have you identified the challenges previously raised by the industry and looked at it and said, okay, we are a new industry now. We're now newly regulated with a new piece of legislation. Have you identified that and say, okay, we're going to work towards and change and actually have a change towards the industry?
Yeah, I think even when we were busy with the legislation, one of the things that the industry was complaining about is the qualification requirements that were not industry specific. You know, they applied mostly to estate agents, but under the PPA, each and every industry will have its own educational requirements that we have to set up. So as a managing agent, you are not going to be doing we are not going to be trained on what an estate agent does. So those are some of the things that the legislation itself have rectified when it comes to the problems that we faced. And then administratively, as an institution, we faced the issue of slowness of issuing FFC. But I think what the legislation then did is, in order to assist us administratively, it has then moved us from issuing an annual FFC to a 3-year FFC, which then takes away the burden, not only from ourselves, but from the property practitioners, who must now concentrate on doing their job and only come back to us after 3 years. So some of the problems that we face, the legislation has tried to intervene.
So let's start off, and we call it what it is. Managing agents. Do they fall within the ambit of the Act? And I'm asking this question. As an attorney, I had to do opinion last week, where a managing agency phoned me and said, well, the Act does not apply to us. This is the reasons why the Act does not apply to us, but just confirm it. So I've done my opinion, but we're sitting with a panel here. So managing agents, these industry, are they regulated by you, and do they form part of the definition of a property practitioner?
Thank you. I think certainly they do. This time we've got a definition which specifically mentions managing agents by name. It also gives us a definition of managing agents who manage property. We find it in the regulations. And we also have a definition of property, which is quite expanded. So we have the fact that the managing of property would include the managing of the interests and duties which are allied to that property, and that you'll find in the definition of the Act, both under property, and then if you look at the definition of a property practitioner, we are told exactly what it is, and we're told that it includes a managing agent.
Okay, so is it correct for me to say I can draft a notice to all my clients to say, if you're a managing agent, the PPRA or the PPA is applicable upon you?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. So in the regulations, Regulation 1.22, we talk about, and that's where you go further with a managing agent, and it refers to what a managing agent means. And the one thing, and this is what I want to unpack, is it refers to scheme executives. What about trustees? Should they register, or are they considered to be property practitioners?
Yeah, I think trustees are. Remember, when you define a property practitioner, you are talking about someone who is mandated to act on behalf of another person, and it does that for a remuneration or reward. So if a trustee acts in that capacity and is remunerated for the duties that he performs, the functions. So you look at the function and what then, after the functions, does he get paid for those functions? And is it in relation to managing property that belongs to another person? And if that if it falls within the definition, then they have to be registered.
Deborah, do you want to add?
Yes, I think that's perfectly clear. The remuneration is the important thing, and I think if you look at the definition, 3 important aspects of a property practitioner are, first of all, that he acts for remuneration. Secondly, that he holds himself out as somebody who performs property practitioner activities. And thirdly, that he does it on behalf of somebody else. And then on the basis of those, we have the definition expanded as it continues. So if you've got a trustee who is not remunerated, obviously he doesn't fall under us.
That's where I wanted to get at. So if an ordinary trustee of a scheme gets appointed at the AGM, they don't need to register as property practitioners.
No, they don't. That's quite correct. If there's no remuneration involved, they don't.
So the catch-all phrase here is the remuneration.
That's the important thing.
So what about executive managing agencies? Because we've now established that an ordinary managing agent needs to register as a property practitioner.
Right.
Executive managing agencies?
You want to
I
carry
think,
on?
yeah. Executive managing agents also need to be registered. Remember, they also are remunerated and they act on behalf of the trustees, of the body corporate. So they have to be registered as well and must have a Fidelity Fund certificate.
Now, also a hot topic for me is the appointment of an administrator over a scheme. Do they need to be registered?
I think our opinion, and I think Deborah will agree with me, and we've got different opinions. We believe that he doesn't have to be registered. And the reason why we say that is because he's not appointed by the body corporate of the trustees. He's appointed by the court. And he acts on the instructions of the court and is paid by the court, and as well his appointment and termination of appointment is done by the court. So he doesn't act on behalf of the court, but is appointed by the court, and then he steps into the shoes of the trustees, and he does not communicate or take any instructions from the trustees. So that's where we believe then that he's not supposed to be registered as a property practitioner.
But he gets remunerated.
Yeah.
Yes, I think he does get remunerated, but I think the problem really is if you're looking at it solely from that point of view, you're excluding the fact that there has to be a mandate. Somebody has to give him a mandate. He's not actually receiving a mandate from the owners. He's not receiving a mandate from the trustees. He is stepping into the shoes of the trustees and the owners of the property. So he is appointed by court, and as such, we don't consider him to be a property practitioner or managing agent.
I do accept and I appreciate the explanation because it makes logical sense. In the industry and in our discussions prior to today, I took it a step further. What about a liquidator? What about a business rescue practitioner? We know they don't have to be appointed.
Right.
So why do you want to try and put in administrator in the same category if it's quite clear that when a company goes into business rescue, that practitioner, the business rescue practitioner, does not have to register.
And he may well be dealing with property. He may well have to sell
Yes.
property. He may have to administer property. The same applies with a liquidator. He's usually selling property, executors, all those kinds of things. So, yeah, it would be taking it to an absurdity, I think,
I agree.
to take it that far.
So the other hot topic is that of the caretaker. Should a caretaker be registered with the PPRA?
Okay, I think that's a very interesting question. And we've noticed in the queries that we've received that people are very title-oriented. And the definition is not title-oriented. The definition doesn't say, if you call this, that, or the other thing, you're now a property practitioner. It instead settles particularly on what you do. So we look at the function of what the person does. So to ask me if a caretaker has to be registered, you have to tell me what your caretaker does. If he's simply cleaning the place and he's checking on the staff who are sweeping up the driveway, obviously not. He doesn't need to be registered with us. His activities are not property practitioner, managing agent activities in the definition of the Act, in our view. But those who are particularly caretakers who also manage important parts of the property. They perform certain management functions as well. Those would have to be.
So if I understand you correctly, and I think for the industry, because we're trying to box this, we're trying to say caretaker. So you've got that title, you must be registered. Now, I understand under what circumstances they must be registered, but it's not an inclusive thing for me. And as you state, this is a thing, and from my perspective, when I advise clients, and there's been notices that try to define a property practitioner within the industry, but it's not a title orientated, it's a function orientated. What do you do?
That's
so
right.
it's a factual question. Am I correct in stating
Absolutely, 100%.
So
in fact, we have that, sorry to interrupt,
No.
but I've had a number of applications in terms of Section 4 for exemptions, and many managing agents have come forward and said, okay, these are the people who work for us. Can we have exemptions? And we have a look and we say, well, okay, the nice thing that they've done is they've actually set out what these people do. What is their job description? And we were able to look at it and say, okay, that one doesn't need an exemption, that one doesn't need an exemption, this one needs an exemption. And that's the facts that we're basing it on.
You actually anticipated the next question, because now we've dealt with the trustees. They don't get paid, they don't have to register. You have a trustee who gets paid, I accept that, register. Get a caretaker, factual question, what do you do? Now the office of a managing agency. Because, with respect, the definition of a property practitioner is extremely wide. I need to sit as an attorney. I need to go through it and read it. And it's one of those definitions, every time that I get a question, I need to go back. And I need to read it.
That's right.
We're sitting with industry people here. Who needs to register in their office? And I had the question, should the receptionist, the tea lady, everybody manages something. So who needs to register within the Office of Managing Agencies?
Okay. I think the first thing is that we have to understand that the firm itself has to be registered. So if you are a property practitioner agency, and particularly a managing agency is what we're talking about, then the firm itself has to be registered. In terms of the legislation, you need to have a firm that you operate under. That firm is registered, whether it's a company, whether it's a sole proprietorship, whether it's a partnership, whether it's a trust, it becomes registered with us. And then you have your directors, who in terms of the Act have to have Fidelity Fund certificates, and your employees who engage in property practitioner activities would need to be. So your receptionist, probably not. She doesn't speak to people about managing their properties. She simply may perhaps answers the phone. She says, I'm referring you to this person or that person or the next person. She probably would not engage in any kind of property practitioner activities. If you have a tea lady, obviously she doesn't either. She simply is support staff for those who do. So you're looking at exactly, again, what they're doing factually on the ground. Portfolio managers have come up often. Our view is portfolio managers, not obviously depending on what they do, but what the general approach is as far as portfolio managers and their functions is concerned, they do fall within the managing agent property practitioner activity section, and they have to be registered.
On the point of portfolio manager, what about their assistants?
Their assistants, yes. That would depend on what their function is. If they're assisting in the management of the property, most certainly they do have to be registered.
So again, and I think this is the view that we want to relay. It is not title orientated, because title orientated depends on me. I employ somebody and I give you a title. The Act does not refer to certain titles. It refers to your functions.
Exactly.
What you actually do. It's a factual question that you need to go back and say, okay, do I form part? Have a look at the definition, and do I do this?
That's exactly.